Section 2, and this will provide you with an overview of the changes made to the standards of education and training. I'm going to start by outlining our considerations when assessing programmes against the revised standards. I will then move on to explain how we will assess that the standards are being met for new and existing programmes. After this, we will have a small practical session looking at 2 case studies linked to Set 4.2 and Set 6.2, which focus upon embedding expectations of professional behaviour. Today will be a good opportunity for you to work with different education providers that are here today and think through how programmes might be able to meet the new standards. It's important to note that we are not prescriptive in our approach, and there will be more than one way as to how you can meet the standards. So let's get started. First of all, can I have a show of hands if any of you have had the chance to look at the revised sets prior to this event? Okay, great, some of you. If you have, you may have noticed that initially there were 58 standards, but now there are only 52 standards. Whilst the standards have been reduced, it's important to note that we have not reduced or relaxed our requirements. Rather, we have just consolidated similar existing standards. In doing so, we have introduced 3 entirely new standards, revised and updated a number of standards with changes to terminology, layout and wording to ensure that the language used is broad, inclusive and up to date. Speaking of changes, we have made some visible changes to terminology. For example, students have now become learners and practice placements are now referred to as practice-based learning. As part of our processes, we no longer ask the education provider to demonstrate how the programme has a secure business plan in place. Instead, we now ask education providers to demonstrate that the programme is sustainable and fit for purpose. Previously, we asked the education provider to demonstrate that the Agritat Award does not grant eligibility to register, but now only learners who successfully complete the programme are eligible for admission onto the register. Why have we done this? Well, we regulate 16 healthcare professions, so it's important that our language is broad, inclusive and up to date. The key point to note here is inclusive. We have tried to ensure that our language is not prohibitive, as our programmes are based at higher education institutions and private organisations. We appreciate that as this is new terminology, it will take some time for you to engage with. So as education providers, you can use whichever terminology you feel more comfortable with. From our perspective, this is the terminology we will be using. So on your tables, there is a copy of the Standards of Education and Training. Can everybody please turn to page 12? So as you read through the sets, you will notice that each standard now follows a particular structure to provide consistency and clarity throughout the guidance. At the top, it clearly states what the standard is for and about. Throughout the guidance, we have defined terms that may be unfamiliar to you. And at the bottom, we have linked back to other sources of guidance, where applicable. Now, if you turn to the back of the set's guidance, you will notice that there is a glossary which gives you a full list of definitions mentioned throughout the sets. And in your packs, you will also find a glossary that has been produced for this session. We have made many smaller changes to the sets, which allow us to use them more effectively. For example, Set 3.13 is the complaints process, which initially focused on requiring that a process is in place. Now this standard, Set 3.15, has been revised to ensure that there is a complaints procedure which is both thorough and effective. Similarly, 4.7 encouraged evidence-based practice, but now the delivery of the programme must support and develop evidence-based practice. Can I have a quick show of hands if any of you have engaged with us through the major change process? Okay, great, some of you. If you have, you may have submitted a major change telling us that there is a change in the named person who has overall professional responsibility for the programme. About 1/3 of our major changes notify us of programme leader changes. As we are confident that the education provider is engaging with our processes, we now ask the education provider to ensure that the person holding overall professional responsibility is appropriately qualified, experienced, and from the relevant part of the register, unless other arrangements have been made. Just to be clear, this means we will be quality assuring the process. So there will be a change in how we deal with changes to a programme's named person who has overall professional responsibility. The expectation is that you still need to notify us for administrative purposes, but after the 2018-19 academic year, you will not need to provide evidence to support the change in the named person once the programme is approved.
Can you say that again, please?
Sure. So 1/3 of our major changes notify us of programme leader changes, and as we are confident that the education provider is engaging with our processes, we now ask the education provider to ensure that the person holding overall professional responsibility is appropriately qualified, experienced, and from the relevant part of the register, unless other arrangements are in place. Just to be clear, this means we will be quality assuring the process. So there will be a change in how we deal with changes to a programme's named person who has overall professional responsibility. The expectation is that you will still need to notify us for administrative purposes, but after the 2018-19 academic year, you will not need to provide evidence to support the change in the named person once the programme is approved. Today, we will be focusing on these 6 new significantly changed standards. You will see we have introduced new standards around the availability and capacity of practice-based learning, learner involvement, support to enable learners to raise concerns, and interprofessional learning. We will be addressing each of these standards in detail throughout the day. For this session, I will be focusing on SAT 4.2 and 6.2. My colleague Ellie will provide you with an overview of 4 standards, which are 3.6, 3.8, 3.17, and 4.9, including the purpose. This is what the standard means to achieve, and considerations includes what you need to think about as the education provider when applying the standards to the programme. The standards 4.2 and 6.2, which we are focusing on this session, are standards that have been significantly changed. We have more clearly embedded expectations of professional conduct, including the standards of conduct, performance, and ethics into our programme design, delivery, and assessment standards. I will be going into more detail on these changes a little later. So far, we have focused on changes which have been made to the sets, but fundamentally, the standards have remained the same. Our regulatory approach has not changed. We are still outcome focused. This means that those who complete approved programs must meet the proficiency standards. Proficiency standards are set at a level to ensure safe and effective practice. It is important to note that we are not prescriptive in our approach, and there will be more than one way as to how you can meet these standards. This must be appropriate to the programme and the profession. In terms of our decision making, we will still consider evidence, and this includes documentations and conversations that we undertake at visits. We always employ professional expertise by having at least one professional expert assessing the programme. This is the implementation timeframe for the revised sets. The approval process is clearly highlighted in orange. This explains that all pre-reg programmes visited on or after the 1st of September 2017 will be reviewed against the revised sets. We have contacted these programmes already to explain our requirements and to request the required documentation. The annual monitoring process is highlighted in purple. Existing programmes will be assessed against the revised sets via the annual monitoring process in the 2018-19 or 19-20 academic year, depending on whether you are allocated to Group A or Group B. If you are unsure which group you are in, there is a full list on our website with more details under the annual monitoring section. When we inform education providers of our monitoring requirements in these years, we will provide specific information about what they will need to provide regarding the revised sets. You do not need to evidence how these standards are met this year via annual monitoring. Moving on to the major change process, which is clearly highlighted in blue, shows that from the 2018-19 academic year, we will assess all major changes to existing programmes against the revised sets. This is because all programmes will have implemented the revised sets by this point.